Gardner had started off by himself for a long tramp through the woods. He had walked quite a distance when he suddenly came to a small brown hut, which he was about to pass when he heard cries of pain coming from it. Running quickly to its one window, he looked in and saw a most extraordinary sight. An old man was alone in the one room, standing near the wall and with his face pressed hard against it. The tears were running down his cheeks and he was moaning piteously. "What is the matter?" said Gardner. "And why do you stand there with your face pressed to the wall?" "Come in, little boy, and I will tell you," was the answer. Gardner ran in and seated himself on a three-legged stool which stood in the middle of the floor. "Day 'fore yesterday," began the old fellow, "I was standing at my door, and a small man with a tall pointed cap and a long beard passed, dressed entirely in brown. He tripped and fell, and I laughed, which made him very angry. 'I will teach you to laugh at me,' he scolded. 'I am a brownie, and no one may laugh or even look at a brownie.' Then he told me that in punishment I must stand here with my nose glued to the wall till some kind boy got for me the Bosh Bosh oil. If I rub some of that on my nose, I shall then be free. You have a kind face, and I wonder if you would be willing to help me." "Indeed, I will get this wonderful oil for you if I can," said Gardner. "Where is it to be found?" "There," and the old man pointed to the top of a mountain near the house. "But the path is a very steep one, little boy, and the brownie said there were many dangers to be braved before one could reach the top. When fairly there, however, you will find the oil in a golden box, in a golden house, and guarded by the famous gold bird. Many boys have been here, but no one would venture, and I suppose I shall have to stay here till I die." And he began to weep again. Now Gardner was a brave as well as kind boy, and he was greatly touched by the old man's sad position. "I will go," he said, "and don't lose your courage, for I will come back soon, and if it is a possible thing, bring the oil." The old man was delighted and thanked the boy heartily as he started on his mission. He walked on for 100 yards or so when he was stopped by a very strong wire which was stretched directly across the path. He got down on his knees and tried to crawl under it, but lo and behold, down came the wire, and he could not pass it. "I will then jump over it," he said. But when he got up it flew, for it was a magic wire, and was there to prevent people going any farther. Gardner looked to the right and left, but found that it stretched way off in the distance on either side, which made it impossible for him to go round it. He sat down for a moment, discouraged, but not for long. That very morning he had exchanged with a boy friend a fine 3-bladed knife for a big red marble and a wonderfully powerful magnet. This magnet he now took from his pocket and held toward the wire. "Aha!" he shouted, for the wire, though evidently with the utmost reluctance, bent to meet it. Magic though it was, it had to obey the magnet. Gardner held the magnet lower and lower, finally laying it on the ground, and sadly obeying it, down, down, down came the wire also. Then the boy stepped over it, and it rattled angrily as he did so. Looking back and laughing merrily, he found to his amazement that the wire had disappeared. And not only that, but his magnet as well had vanished. Gardner was, of course, greatly surprised, but he expected to see strange things, and so, in a moment, continued his journey. He had not gone far when he saw before him, sitting in the middle of the path, a small but very pretty Italian greyhound, who was looking at him intently, her little head cocked on one side, and her 2 ears, which were enormous, raised in the greatest astonishment. "Where did you come from, boy?" she asked. "I came from below," he answered, "and my name is not Boy, but Gardener, doggy." "And my name is not Doggy, but Little Pitcher," was the answer, while the large ears were held proudly upright. "Well, Little Pitcher, you seem to be a nice dog, but I cannot waste time talking to you. I must hurry on." "I am sorry," said the dog politely, but very firmly, "but this place you shall not pass." Gardner smiled. "You funny little thing," he said, "and how are you going to prevent my doing so?" "In this way." And the boy suddenly found himself seated in the path, tripped by the nimble little hound. 3 times was this repeated, till Gardner at last sat down by the side of the path and glared angrily at his small tormentor. Then he remembered that he had a cracker in his pocket. Taking it out, he offered it to the little animal. "Thank you, I have already dined," was the dignified answer. "Then don't you want to come for a walk with me?" And Gardner smiled persuasively at the dog, who wagged her tail, but said she had just returned from a long walk. The boy's heart sank. There remained but one more thing to try. "On my way up here," he began, and truthfully too, "I saw a cat." At this, Pitcher's eyes glistened, and she was visibly affected, although she was silent for a moment. Then coming nearer the boy, she whispered, "What kind of a cat?" "Big and strong, and a fighter, I dare say." "No, rather a gentle, frightened-looking cat." The small dog's body grew suddenly rigid. Her eyes rolled. She smacked her lips and said, "Ah, well, she was very near her home, I suppose?" "No, in a field." "Zounds! You don't say so? Of course she was near shelter of some sort? Near a tree?" "No, in an open field." "You don't say so?" Pitcher was now trembling, and her voice was hoarse with excitement. This cat," she panted, "was facing the road, I suppose?" "On the contrary," said Gardner, "her back was toward the road, and she was sound asleep." "Back toward the road, and asleep? Great Sirius, this is too much! I cannot let this chance go." And with a howl of delirious excitement, Pitcher vanished down the path. Gardner, laughing heartily, went on. But only for a few steps, for his way was again blocked, this time by a bush, a cruel-looking bush, covered with long, sharp thorns, which grew directly in the middle of the path. The boy tried to pass on the right side, when to his amazement the thorn bush gave a funny little hop and placed itself directly in front of him. He then ran quickly to the left, but the bush ran too and stood firmly before him, again barring the way. While wondering what to do, he saw lying on the ground near a small box. Full of curiosity, he opened it and found it contained a large fat yeast cake. But it was not a common, everyday yeast cake, for it smelt like delicious candy. Gardner tasted it carefully, and finding it was as good as it smelt, ate it all. And then what do you think happened? He suddenly felt himself rise. Up, up, up. He was lifted high over the thorn bush, and then down, down, down he slowly came on the other side. For the yeast he had eaten was made in fairyland, and, working much quicker than ours can, had made Gardner rise at once. 4 times he bounded up into the air, each time being carried not quite so high, and the last time he was dropped right in front of a boy who was seated in the middle of the path and who looked at him in surprise. This boy was older than Gardner, and he was big and fat, and to Gardner's horror, he had a bright blue face. "What are you bounding along in that absurd way for?" he asked, and Gardner told him about the yeast cake and begged him to let him go on his way. "No," said Blueface with much firmness, "that I shall not do. I have sat here for 5 years and shall do so for the next 5. Come again in 5 years and then perhaps I will let you pass." "Oh," said Gardner, "that will be much too late. I am in a great hurry, for I wish to get some of the Bosh Bosh oil for the poor old man at the foot of the hill. He is suffering." "Well," said Blueface indifferently, "that of course is nothing to me. I cannot let you pass." Gardner put his hand into his pocket and drew forth the big red marble. "Oh, what a beauty!" said Blueface admiringly. "It shall be yours if you will let me pass." "No." "Then it shall be yours if you can catch it." "Take your offer and thanks for it," said Blueface. Gardner then threw up the marble, and in such a way that when it fell it must roll down the path. This it did, and Blueface, seeing what was now his own property rolling rapidly down the hill away from him, forgot everything and dashed after it, while Gardner, seizing his chance, flew in the other direction. "Goodbye, Blueface!" he shouted, but receiving no answer, looked back to find no boy, and alas, no marble. "What a strange path this is," he said, "and how can things disappear so quickly?" The air was now suddenly filled with deafening barks. "Bow wow wow!" in a very high key, "Bow wow wow!" in a middle-sized key, and "Bow wow wow!" in a very low key. Gardner stopped and looked about him, but saw no dogs. "Those are dogs, I know," he said, "and wherever they are, I am sure I hope they are muzzled," for he could not help feeling a bit nervous. A sharp turn, and a strange sight was before him. In the very middle of the path stood an enormous brown jug, and in this jug, and apparently fastened by their tails, were about 20 snakes. At least Gardner thought they were snakes, till on examination he found that each had the head of a dog. One the small head of a black and tan, another of the impertinent pug, one of the big shaggy St. Bernard, another of the Newfoundland, and so on, and each dog head was barking its loudest, while the snake bodies were writhing wildly from side to side. The boy's heart sank. "Never, never can I pass those things, whatever they are," he said. Then he remembered the poor old man waiting for him. "Good dogs, good doggies," he said in a wheedling tone, though his teeth were chattering with fear. His answer was louder barking from the dog snakes, and wilder writhing from the snake dogs. Suddenly he thought of the cracker in his pocket. Breaking off a piece, he threw it down near the jug. Snap! And one of the dog snakes had eaten it, and with apparent relish. Then he broke up all the crackers into small pieces, and going as near the big jug as he dared, threw them on the ground at one side. All the dog snakes bent at once to eat them, which for a second left the other side free, and in that second, but with his heart beating hard, Gardner darted by. The dogs, finding that he had escaped them, gave one tremendous bark, and then, when the boy looked back, nothing was to be seen except the dusty brown path stretching off behind him. On he trudged, and suddenly stepped into something horrid, very black and fearfully sticky. He drew back his foot quickly, but in doing so, the boot was actually torn from him. He then tried to go round the sticky mass, but, alas, it seemed to extend on either side as far as the eye could reach. Then he tried to pull out his boot, but it was as firmly embedded as if it had grown there. "This," he said, "is the very worst place I have reached yet. What shall I do?" A bunch of brilliant yellow flowers now attracted his attentions. "Buttercups," he said. "And what monstrous ones they are! And oh, what in the world does this mean? They are real buttercups." For on stooping to examine them, he found that each little yellow flower was filled to overflowing with something that certainly looked like very good butter. Gardner was amazed, and then a funny thought came to him. "Why not butter my feet? And then perhaps I shall be able to cross this pitch pond." So laughing at the thought, he carefully covered the sole of his boot and the sole of his stocking, and very nasty that felt too, with the butter. Then he cautiously tried one foot on the pitch, and found that he could now walk over it with the utmost ease. He had soon crossed it, and turned to give one last look at his lost boot, when, and Gardner rubbed his eyes to make sure, for he thought he must be mistaken, he found that the black sticky mass had disappeared, and with it his boot. He had scarcely recovered from his astonishment when he was startled by hearing a tremendous quack. Looking up, he saw a little way up the path a monster duck. Never had he imagined such an enormous bird. Its mouth was wide open and was fully as large as a window. This alarming creature was coming down upon Gardner as fast as she could waddle, and her eyes were snapping angrily. He had, poor boy, but a moment in which to make up his mind, and what do you think he did? Seizing a handful of buttercups, and how fortunate it was for him that they happened to grow right there, he covered his entire head with butter. Then, gathering himself together, he ran toward the duck with a tremendous rush. He was the very best runner at school, which was, of course, of the greatest assistance to him in doing this wonderful thing. Can you credit me when I tell you that Gardner jumped directly into the widely opened mouth of the monster duck, and that he went with such tremendous force that he shot right through her, landing a foot beyond her, face down on the ground? Of course his slippery, buttered head was a great, great help to him. But it was in any case a most marvellous thing for a boy to have done, was it not? He lay there for 5 minutes, without moving, for he felt naturally quite weak. Then, remembering the poor old man, he slowly picked himself up and went on, first turning to see what had become of the duck, whose dead body he expected to see. But no duck, either dead or alive, was there. He was, however, beyond being astonished at anything now. "I don't at all like the feeling of this butter on my head," he said, as he continued his journey, "and I wish I could find some water so that I could wash it off." His wish was gratified, for there, right before him, was a well, and not only a well, but a bucket too. This Gardner filled, and succeeded in washing most of the butter from his head. Then he saw that to continue on his road, he must either go round the well or step over it. To go round was impossible, as the ground on either side was too steep. To step over was equally impossible, for the well was very large. "Butter won't help me here," he thought sadly. Looking down into the well, he called out, "Won't you please go off, well, and let me get the Bosh Bosh oil for the poor old man?" And then he almost fell into the hole, for a voice far, far below answered, saying, "Who is speaking to me?" Gardner was much frightened, for he thought this must be some other boy who had fallen into the well. "Who are you?" he called out. "Truth," came the answer, and then Gardner remembered to have heard that truth lies at the bottom of a well. "I wish you would come up here, Truth," he said, for an idea had suddenly come to him. "Very well," said Truth. "Wait a moment and I will be there." Gardner promised, for indeed what else could he do but wait? Soon a scrambling and scratching was heard, and Truth slowly crept up till he reached a big stone which jutted out at one side about 2 feet from the top. And on this he sat, while Gardner looked at him in astonishment, for he was truly a most remarkable fellow. He looked young, he looked old, he was very big and round, and he had the kindest, frankest, sweetest face you can imagine. Gardner thought at first he must be made of glass, for he was so wonderfully transparent, you could see right through him. "Now, boy," said he, "what do you want to ask me?" "Why you don't tell the truth at all times." "Tell the truth at all times? I do. I am truth itself," was the indignant answer. "But everyone says that truth lies at the bottom of a well." At this, Truth laughed heartily, so heartily that he almost fell from his slippery seat, and then he explained that it was a different kind of a lie. "But I don't see," continued Gardner, "why you live at the bottom of a well, anyway. I should think you would prefer the top, but perhaps, Truth, you can't lie down as easily at the top of a well." "Oh yes, Truth can go anywhere," was the proud answer. "I will show you." And crawling up, he lay down over the well, completely covering it. This was the little boy's chance for which he had been waiting. With one bound he was over, using poor Truth for a bridge, but stepping very lightly, not to hurt him. He heard a great splash, a loud cry from Truth, and looked back to see nothing. Nothing but the dusty path. The well and fat, pleasant Truth had vanished. Now as the boy went on, the path changed. It became very beautiful. On either side most gorgeous flowers filled the air with delicious perfume, while lovely birds, which Gardner had never seen before, sang loudly. Suddenly he felt a light touch on his arm, and turning, saw beside him a wee maid, a fairy. "Gardner," she said, "you have been a very brave boy. You have passed in safety all the dangers of the path, and I will now lead you to the golden temple containing the Bosh Bosh oil, which is guarded by the famous gold bird." So Gardner walked on with her, trembling with excitement. Sweet music was heard, a soft yellow light shone on him, and then, looking up, he saw before him the temple. It was a round house made of solid, shining yellow gold. Slender gold pillars supported the roof, which was made of diamonds and was too dazzlingly beautiful to look at. They entered and sat down on the wonderful chairs, which were made of precious stones, one being of sapphire, one of rubies, one of emeralds, and so on. A small gold table stood in the middle of the room. On it was a golden box containing the wonderful oil, and guarded by the gold bird. His head was a huge diamond, his eyes 2 brilliant emeralds, and his body and wings were of gold. When he saw Gardner, he opened the box lid with his bill, and there lay 7 tiny bottles of the wonderful oil, which, to tell the truth, looked just like kerosene. The fairy gave one bottle to Gardner, who thanked her and the bird, and with his prize clasped in his hands ran swiftly down the path, delighted to think that even if he had lost his boot and his marble and his magnet, he could now help the poor old man. He had reached the foot of the path when he saw a small black object lying directly in the middle of it. When he came up to it, He found to his delight that it was his boot. Sitting down, he tried to put it on, but something hard in the heel prevented his doing so. Putting in his hand, he drew out his magnet. And again he tried, and this time something round and hard in the toe prevented him. This proved to be his lost marble, and now the little boy was quite happy. Running to the hut, he found that the old man was crying as if his heart would break, for he thought that the boy, who had been gone a long time, was never coming with the magic oil, and that he would have to remain there, his face pressed to the wall, till death came. Gardner ran to him and showed his treasure, and they at once rubbed some of the oil on the poor old sufferer's nose, which, as the brownie had said, immediately became free. And then Gardner, followed by the old man's thanks and blessings, went home.